Hello, everyone, and welcome to IPHE's webinar series. I'm Eric Parker, representative of the International Partnership for Hydrogen Energy, hosting today's webinar. Today we have a presentation from Dr. Klaus Bonhoff of NOW in Germany, who will be presenting on hydrogen and fuel cell technology in Germany. This is part of a series, and I encourage you to check out the rest of our webinars online as well. And with that, I will kick it over to Dr. Bonhoff. Thank you for joining.
Eric, thank you very much for the introduction. Hi, this is Klaus Bonhoff. I'm the Managing Director of the National Organization for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in Germany. And within the next 30 minutes or so, I'd like to just talk about our hydrogen and fuel cell program in Germany, highlighting the various areas of applications, but obviously also looking into the role that hydrogen has. So it's from market preparation really to competitive products, and it is about getting hydrogen and fuel cell technologies into the commercial space to make sure that we have the impact that we need from these technologies. So with that, let me start my presentation. As I've said, I'm working with NOW. We are a program management organization owned by the German government. Kind of like a public-private partnership is how we try to implement the National Innovation Program for Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies in Germany. Let me start with a little bit the political landscape, and one of the main drivers that we actually see these days for hydrogen and fuel cell technologies in Germany, which is climate change and the role hydrogen will have to play in reducing CO2 emissions. The German government has targets for CO2 emissions in various sectors, and each one of these sectors has made progress over the recent years, but each sector has very different targets and stringent targets to really get to lower CO2 emissions by 2030. And obviously, hydrogen and fuel cell technologies will and can play a role in each of these sectors, as in energy, building, transport, and industry, partly agriculture as well, but it's really the energy sector, the building sector, and the transportation sector. So let me briefly start by looking into what we call an integrated energy system. So far, we have been looking a lot into individual sectors, and we were trying to optimize in terms of efficiency and emissions each sector. In the end, we'll have to make sure that we have, from an input point of view, renewable energies that go into the energy system as a whole, and energy includes transportation, stationary, and the industry sector. And we need to make sure that we get renewable energies to all of these various applications that are out there. So we need infrastructures for power directly, but then obviously whenever it comes to larger amounts of energy, when it comes to more flexibility in transporting energy, we do talk about hydrogen. So producing hydrogen, especially from renewable power, distributing that hydrogen and using it in various sectors will have to play a major role in an integrated energy system. And then obviously hydrogen can also be used to further on synthesize other fuels and other energy carriers to support those applications that are not directly accessible to power or hydrogen directly. So we see hydrogen really as part of this integrated system, and hydrogen by no means is to competition of any of these other technologies. We do see hydrogen, fuel cell, batteries, and all these technologies complementary one to the other. They all will be needed in a smart, integrated energy system. The analysis on this slide here shows quite clearly that looking at the transportation sector, there is room and a need for battery electric mobility, for fuel cell and hydrogen mobility, as well as for synthetic fuels based upon renewable hydrogen for aviation and ships. So this slide was developed to show that those sectors that mostly emit CO2, which is the light-duty vehicle sector as well as the heavy-duty vehicle sector, will need batteries and fuel cells to really offer the customer value as in longer range and faster recharging. So the larger the vehicle is, the heavier it is, the more important fuel cell technologies will be complementing batteries. And remember that fuel cell drivetrains are hybridized drivetrains, so even larger fuel cell systems will have a high voltage battery on board. So it's these both technologies that are key to really get us to a zero emission mobility pattern in the future. So the German government has been supporting hydrogen and fuel cell technologies since over 10 years. We started our National Innovation Program for Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies in 2007, and the first funding period were 10 years until 2016. The evaluation that was done in order to assess the impact of public funding clearly showed that with the activities which were really focusing on larger scale demonstration and applied research and development, that these activities led to an accelerated market development. The German government has spent over 700 million euros in R&D funding. We believe that this helped our industry to stay on top of the game alongside with other countries, but still, pretty good on top of the game. And from a public perspective, very important that this public funding did trigger follow-on investments within the industry. And you can see the individual figures on this slide here, but basically the result was it was a meaningful program that led us to the point where we had a technology at hand which now needs to really go into commercialization. And commercialization does mean to continue research and development, which is always very important, but on top of that, to really identify measures for market activation, to get technology that serves the customer needs really into the market, which means you need to reduce the cost of the technology, you really need to get into more volume. So hydrogen in transport, hydrogen from renewable energy sources, as well as stationary use for fuel cell systems in cogeneration, for example, are important areas for market activation that the German government is supporting on top of ongoing research and development activities. And the commitment the government gave was to spend in the next 10 years until 2026 another 1.4 billion euros in individual programs and activities that serve this purpose here. One of the major contributors in terms of public funding is the Ministry for Transport and Digital Infrastructure, and as you can see on this slide here, pretty much in a 50-50 share, we see research and development activities ongoing, and we see new market activation activities, plus some studies and some cluster management. And in the transportation sector, we are addressing the various sectors, vehicle sectors, as in cars, light-duty vehicles, and so forth. But we're also addressing the infrastructure that is needed to support these vehicles or to fuel these vehicles with hydrogen. So hydrogen refueling station, and in some cases even the question where does that hydrogen come from, are part of the program funded by the Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure. Let me just briefly go through the various sectors and let us see where we are in terms of commercial deployment of fuel cell technologies. Obviously, cars are always a very emotional topic. We have here in Germany 4 models that are available. It is 3 models because the Honda, which here is on this picture on the lower right-hand corner, is available in California and obviously in Japan, but not in Germany. But we have the Toyota Mirai, the Hyundai Nexo, and the Mercedes-Benz GLC F-Cell here in our markets in Germany. We don't have a huge number of vehicles at this point in time that have been registered, but we did want to make sure that we have the right infrastructure initially in place, and we see now more and more vehicles coming into the market. Actually, personally, I'm driving the Mercedes-Benz F-Cell since last November. I have put some 10,000 miles on that vehicle, so it is a great vehicle, as all fuel cell and electric vehicles are. Very smooth driving and very comfortable driving as well. So we do like to see more of these vehicles coming, and as we move forward, we obviously hope that our OEMs, our car manufacturers, continue to bring models into the market. On the bus side, we have over the last 10 years done quite some demonstration activities, and we continue to do so. Obviously, fuel cell buses give you a good flexibility in daily operation, 300-kilometer range, fast refueling, and again, low noise, very comfortable driving. Actually, those people that ride on these buses are very, very much in favor of this type of buses because they're so comfortable and low noise. So we see, and I have some examples in a minute, more of these buses coming online. Another sector which is very important when it comes to intralogistic applications and when it comes to metropolitan mobility patterns is commercial vehicles, light-duty commercial vehicles, and you can see a couple of examples here on this slide. Especially DHL has started to bring a fleet of then ultimately up to 500 fuel cell vehicles onto the road. Based on a battery electric platform, they integrated a fuel cell system to extend the range and to put more flexibility into the operation. And we'll see those vehicles coming into the streets early next year, and then a rollout of the fleet. Heavy duty is also very important. Various sectors, mid-sized vehicles, again, to bring goods into the cities, but then also heavy duty long-haul trucks that are under development, and we hope to see them being in demonstration projects within the next years. Again, looking at our German national CO2 targets, we are convinced that we will need in the order of 10 million fuel cell and battery electric passenger car vehicles in the market by then, and we have in Germany a little over 40 million in the market, so a market share in the fleet of 25%. And on the heavy-duty side, a few 100,000 trucks that will be needed to meet CO2 levels that are required by European directives. So these are very, very important sectors to really drive CO2 down for transportation. One example here, just very recently, we've seen orders of 40 fuel cell buses, 30 being planned for Cologne, 10 for the city of Wuppertal. So these cities have been testing these vehicles for quite a while. They are all looking into building a dedicated infrastructure to support these buses. So this is ongoing, that we see more and more fuel cell buses hitting the streets in our cities here in Germany. This is an example of a train project. In this case, it's Siemens, who has started to develop a fuel cell supported zero emission train. It's a regional train. The platform is a pure electric one, and they again include the fuel cell system to extend the range once overhead wires are no longer available. So this is a research project which will turn into a demonstration project once the integration has been successfully done. Here we have the example of a fuel cell garbage collection truck. So there is quite some mobility in these special applications that we see in cities, where more and more diesel engines will have to be replaced by zero emission technologies. And as you can imagine, a truck like this requires not only power for the drivetrain, but also for all the auxiliary systems on board. So fuel cells and hydrogen as a storage do make a lot of sense, again complementing the battery part of these hybrid systems as well. On the rail side, we have in Germany quite a few rail distances on the regional train side that are diesel driven today, which ultimately will have to be replaced by zero emission solutions. To electrify these tracks is very, very costly, so the lower cost option really is to replace the diesel engine with a fuel cell engine. And one of the shiny examples we have here, besides the example I was talking about already with Siemens, is the Coradia Island model from Alstom. And they have, over the last years, via research and development, via demonstration, come to a point where today they are selling the first small fleets to regional train operators. And we can see that in some parts of Germany, on the northwest side, on the western side to the southwestern side, that some regions have already decided or in the process of deciding to buy these trains. It's really a success story from research and development to deployment. So we started already in 2014, where obviously all the stakeholders involved agreed on a letter of intent to develop this technology, where public funding was made available to do research and development, and then also the first demonstration, and where today we really have seen a market launch of these trains with 14 trains already on order in Lower Saxony, and some 28 trains being prepared for our state on the west side of Germany in Hessen. So this is a very nice continuous story from R&D to market launch. This is exactly what our program was meant to be, to provide that continuity, to provide also public funding, but also public support in other areas as in certification, infrastructure development, to bring these products successfully into the market. So these are the examples I was talking about, 14 trains in Lower Saxony and 28 trains in Hessen. So moving on, one final slide on the train side. Yes, these things are costly in a sense. It's roughly 50 million euros that were made available for R&D, but also to subsidize the deployment and the investment into the trains with commercial operators. Now, in any application, infrastructure is obviously very key. In Germany, we started as early as 2009 to start an initiative which is called H2 Mobility Germany, which after a joint analysis phase turned into a joint venture that was founded by individual corporations, gas and oil and car companies. And H2 Mobility really is our main vehicle to build hydrogen stations in Germany. So as you can see here on this slide, we have today around about 70 stations in operation, and the app h2.live always gives you an actual real status of whether or not these stations are available or not. You can see some red dots here, which means that there is a service going on or some other malfunction that may happen. But this is really a very good tool when you drive a fuel cell vehicle to see where can I refuel and does it work, yes or no. You can hit a little future button on the right hand corner, which shows you where more stations will be coming along, and this is all part of a larger plan that we have to build 100 stations in Germany independently of the number of vehicles, to make sure that we have an initial hydrogen network available, public hydrogen stations, 700 bar, 4 passenger cars, so that actually when the customer wants to buy a vehicle, he does know that he can actually refuel hydrogen. So this, I guess, is one of the key activities that we have to deploy research, to deploy hydrogen refueling stations. And with H2 Mobility, we have a commercial structure in place that is investing into this, but that is also gaining a lot of operational experience. And we are in the process in continuing that program, obviously, also to continue to support it from a German government perspective, but also to look into the question how we can use this operational experience to expand the network beyond Germany to really look at ultimately a European network in the end. Now, talking about deploying hydrogen and fuel cell technologies, regions are obviously key partners in these activities. And we initiated a program which is called Highland to support regional concepts for the integration of hydrogen and fuel cells, as well as measures to increase knowledge and to increase acceptance. Acceptance still is very key, but in the end you need to make sure that on a regional political level concepts are in place that take hydrogen activities into account. Now, looking at the activities from the past years, there are some regions that already have some very detailed experience with hydrogen and they want to accelerate the deployment. These would be our high performers at the right-hand side of this slide here. But there are other regions that haven't really started thinking about hydrogen. So we kind of developed this concept of 3 different categories. In a very first step, a high starter region would get some support to start looking into hydrogen. In a second step, high experts would start looking into putting more details to their concepts towards implementation. And then again, the high performers would be those regions that really deploy hydrogen applications in larger scale. So more details are highlighted here on this slide. We are in the process of identifying 9 regions that are the winning regions, if you want to, from a contest that we did over the last month. And the idea here would be that these 9 regions would get a 2-year organizational and content consulting support. And we have seen 138 letter of intents from various regions in Germany. So there was a huge interest, and we see that interest in hydrogen growing basically every day here in Germany these days, as we more and more talk about these integrated energy systems, the need for zero emission mobility. So more and more people understand the role hydrogen has to play, and they want to understand really what's in it for me. So that's this category. We will later this year start a competition for the high experts and the high performers, and we're looking at 5 regions that will win the high expert status and 2 regions that will win the high performer status. And really, within high experts, we're trying to make sure that people are really going into more detailed planning, really concrete project ideas, to then provide them with funding to get them started on these activities. And on the high performance side, we're looking at a total budget of up to 20 million in funding to really get some implementation in integrated regional concepts for hydrogen fuel cell technologies. So it's that concept within Highland that we are pushing these days quite prominently, again, because regions are key partners in getting these technologies into the market. Here's some more details on these 138 expressions of interest by communities and regions for the high starters. And we have seen interest from all over the country, and we will, alongside the criteria mentioned here, take a decision on those 9 winning regions, and we expect that to happen anytime soon. So we try to cover different regions that have different energy concepts. We're looking at coastal lands which have a high degree of wind energy in their portfolio. We have some regions that are facing very heavy structural change, because also the German government has decided to fade out of use of coal-fired power plants. So we see these structural changes, and obviously hydrogen fuel cell technologies offer a great opportunity to safeguard jobs and to offer a perspective to these regions. We have regions that are heavily into the automotive industry, and with the automotive industry shifting towards electric and fuel cell and battery electric technologies, we want to support these regions as well. On the mobility side, obviously metropolitan regions are key. We're trying to find medium-sized and comparatively prosperous municipalities which are willing to invest. And also we are willing and aware of the fact that Germany is part of a European landscape, and as a central country within Europe, we do need to look at cross-border cooperation. So this also is one of the criteria that we put forward. So we try with those 9 regions to cover all of these aspects as much as possible. Now, talking about the integrated energy system, one of the key technologies clearly is the electrolyzer. So coming from solar and wind, supporting the power grid, electrolyzer can really put a lot of flexibility into the energy system, and the hydrogen coming out of the electrolyzer obviously is then valuable as hydrogen in individual markets, but also valuable as a feedstock for power to liquids, power to gas technologies, or even industrial usages. So we've looked very intensively in a study at the status of electrolyzer technology, at possible ramp-up scenarios for electrolyzer capacity, and we were also asking the question whether or not there are major drawbacks that we may face. And this slide here shows the market opportunities for electrolyzers in Germany in moving forward until 2030. We have defined intermediate milestones for 2020, 2025, and 2030, and in the region of anywhere of 1 through 5 gigawatts per year, we do see a substantial market opportunity for electrolyzers, not only in Germany, these are the German figures, but really worldwide. So just as a side remark here, I don't have a slide on that, just very recently, the Ministry for Economic Affairs has launched a funding program which does include electrolyzer technologies, and the project proposals they received sum up to a capacity of 350 megawatt of electrolyzer powers that we potentially see being installed in Germany within the next 2 to 3 years possibly. So I guess we're well on track with this roadmap here that you can see on this slide. And obviously we need to make sure that we have a supply market that supports this ramp up. And we prospectively obviously don't only see this as a German market opportunity, but as a global market opportunity. And if you look at the IEA report that was published recently alongside the G20 meeting in Japan, we see a global market for hydrogen coming, and again, electrolyzers are key in order to provide us with that hydrogen. Obviously, cost is an important topic, and the cost of production of hydrogen is important. So in Germany specifically, we have quite some burdens on the cost side based on different fees that are added to your power bill. So under normal circumstances today, you would produce your hydrogen for around about 10 euros per kilogram of hydrogen. But then there are various measures that can be taken that would ultimately reduce the price for hydrogen down to below 4 euros per kilogram, maybe even below 2 euros per kilogram. So we clearly see that cost reduction path to these kind of figures, which then really makes hydrogen competitive in the energy sector. We have quite some ongoing activities on power-to-gas activities, where various applications, as in mobility, energy services, stationary usage, industrial usage of hydrogen are being addressed. Around about 55 megawatts today, and as I've said, we will see around about another 350 megawatts being installed within the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years, as part of the reale Labore, as we say in German, which is like real testing environment, which is a funding program by the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy. Now, we have to look into larger scale deployment. We have new stakeholders that are coming into this game. It's no longer only about those companies directly involved into hydrogen, but we see the TSOs, the transport support operators, service operators for gas and for power being interested, especially in the northern part of Germany. This is where we have a high share of fluctuating renewable power input, especially from wind farms. And wherever then going down south, the grid capacity is not sufficient to provide more electricity down south. The idea is really to produce hydrogen and then use maybe even existing natural gas pipelines by blending hydrogen into natural gas, or by using these pipelines for 100% pure hydrogen to transporting that hydrogen to those regions where it is needed, industrial regions, for various purposes. So these are meaningful investments that are being prepared by TSOs on the gas and on the power side here in Germany. And again, we see some support for those activities from the German government. The challenges for market activation obviously are still costs. Yes, CapEx and OpEx needs to be reduced, mainly OpEx, and this is the power price I was talking about. Lifetime is not really an issue, but obviously increased lifetime would help to reduce cost as well. We need the right political framework, because today hydrogen is just not seen as an energy carrier or as a fuel, so we need to make sure that it is implemented into the regulatory framework. And we need to develop the markets for what we call green hydrogen, so hydrogen coming from solar and wind power sources. So this is addressing the mobility market, but also industry, hydrogen as feedstock for various industrial processes, steel industry, chemical industry, as some examples. So as we speak, the German government is developing a national hydrogen strategy. We will probably see this being published later this year. So based on the very important National Innovation Program that we've seen over the last more than 10 years by now, now we clearly go into a more political framework for hydrogen, developing a national strategy which addresses all of these areas that I just now mentioned. Now we see these activities always as part of our European activities, but obviously also as part of our international activities. So international cooperation is a key enabler for hydrogen, and there's quite a few international partnerships that have been founded, some pretty long time ago, like the obviously California Fuel Cell Partnership, which is in California, but the IPHE, the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, that was established in as early as 2003. and which continues to be a very important exchange platform for governments, but also in exchange with industry, with the experts. So it is important that we share our knowledge, that we share our experiences on a program side and also on a technical side. So just recently, more initiatives were added. Mission innovation as one example, where with a clear target toward climate change technologies, we try to foster international cooperation. The IEA has a very deep knowledge of technical things around hydrogen fuel technologies, and more recently they came out with this study that I mentioned, where they really in a very broad way showed the importance and the impact that hydrogen will have in a future energy system, and that yes, hydrogen will reduce CO2, will create jobs. So this is really a very, very important study, providing, I guess, us with a pretty good basis for the political discussion to convince people that it is worthwhile to continue to invest into hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. So my last slide is just highlighting how we see national activities being in line with international approaches. I talked about the Highland project. This is very much in line with the concept of the hydrogen valleys that the European Commission has initiated, and this also is in line with what Mission Innovation is doing under the IC number 8, the Innovation Challenge number 8. We do need to make sure, again, that we share our learnings, that we bring the stakeholders together, that we link national with international activities. And with that, I would like to thank you all very much for your attention. And Eric, I guess I hand it over back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Klaus, for such an informative presentation on NOW and what's going on in Germany. And with that, that concludes our webinar for today. Again, I would encourage everyone to visit the IPHE website at iphe.net to learn more about the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy and see not only what Germany is doing, but what countries around the world are doing in the hydrogen and fuel cell industry. And as well to stay tuned for future webinars featuring other IPHE member countries. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, and goodbye.